Hello, and welcome to the Global Peace Foundation podcast. In this series, we will take a look at the areas that Global Peace Foundation is involved with. We are inviting experts to join us for a deeper discussion about the issues facing our world. My name is Tony Devine, and I'm the Vice President of Education with Global Peace Foundation. To share about transforming education and the importance of moral and innovative leadership, we have Dr. Andreas Schleicher, who is the Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. He oversees PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, and other international initiatives that have created a global platform for policymakers, researchers, and educators to innovate and transform education. I'm excited to welcome Andreas to today's episode. Thank you, Andreas, for being on this main plenary, tackling this very important segment on moral and innovative leadership. We really do appreciate the investment you have made for many, many, many decades to transform education around the world. So let me start, Andreas, with the first question today. So what competencies, meaning knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, will today's students need to thrive and shape a better world?
Well, these days, if you can live with yourself, if you can live with other people, if you can live with the planet, obviously you have a huge advantage. I think what's also very important is your capacity to imagine, to create, to build something of intrinsic positive worth, your capacity to navigate ambiguity, manage complexity. You know, the world is no longer black and white. Often, you need to reconcile and manage tensions and dilemmas. But what's perhaps most important is your capacity to mobilize your cognitive, social, and emotional resources to do something, to take action. Now, often we do know the answer to questions. We often have the skills to actually respond. We may have the attitudes, but we still don't succeed to mobilize, to create that kind of agency. And I think that's really, really central. We have made students often passive learners of knowledge rather than active agents.
To deal with the unprecedented challenges of our world, why are shared values increasingly important to meet complex demands in situations of uncertainty?
Well, I think shared values have always been important. But, if you look, I think back to in history, shared values were, born with us. They were sort of the shared values in a tribal community, in our families. It's very, very easy to relate to people who think like us, who look like us, who work like us. So I think those shared values have always existed. But what is different today that we need to invest in the kind of bridging social capital, our capacity to relate to strangers, our capacity to appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of working. And I think those capacities are really quite novel. And so today we have to create shared values with people who are different from us. In the past, it was enough to relate to the people that we know very well, that we are very comfortable with now.
So building on that, knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values, as you stated, are important competencies for students to develop. Now, can you articulate why knowledge and skills, which are actually value neutral, like creativity and so on, that's value neutral, it can be used for a good or a bad purpose, why do these need to be mediated and guided by values?
Well, I think today education is less about teaching people something. It's mostly about, helping them develop a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through the world that is increasingly complex, volatile, ambiguous. I think that kind of compass has become absolutely crucial, particularly in the world of, artificial intelligence around us. Artificial intelligence is not a magic power. It's a great amplifier. It's a great accelerator, but it will accelerate good ideas and good practice in the same way it accelerates bad ideas and bad practice. And that makes, human judgment so central. Artificial intelligence technology is going to take over a lot of cognitive function, the kind of routine kind of functions in our thinking. But that, capacity to judge, to distinguish what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, that is a deeply human capacity that becomes increasingly important as, technologies amplify our kind of capabilities as humans.
The theme of the 2021 Global Peace Convention is moral and innovative leadership in peace building for our changing world. So our students are the leaders of today. Why is moral leadership and a moral compass becoming increasingly important for them to develop?
Yeah, once again, I think that kind of inner compass that tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, is what distinguishes us most from the artificial intelligence that we have created in our computers. To have orientation for yourself, but also to provide orientation to others. That kind of leadership is crucially important, to create that kind of enabling leadership where leadership is not framed by how many people follow you, but how you create leadership capacity, how you build the capacity among people to collaborate for the greater good.
So yeah, building on this greater good idea, a central aspect of moral leadership is promoting a greater good that can benefit not only the individual, but the larger society, nation, and eventually the world. Now, why is that an important orientation for our young people to have, that they can actually shape their world in reality, not just in their mindset, but in real world terms?
Well, you just look around yourself. All the big questions of our times are questions of global common goods. You think about the climate challenge. You think even about the pandemic. These are challenges that transcend borders, that transcend cultures. I think they are really requiring us to think beyond our immediate interest, to make better trade-offs between the present and the future, between the now and the then, between our individual interests and our collective interests. And I think that's a capacity actually humans are born with, but that we often don't develop very well. When we send children to school, it's about developing individual competences. We don't pay as much attention to the capacity of people to collaborate, to create shared and common goods. And I know that from our own PISA assessments, when we assessed young people about their individual problem solving skills, sometimes they were doing really well on this, but when we tested their capacity to collaborate with other people, the picture was often very different. Now, our education systems are still very much built on individual competencies, not collective capacity. But I do think that is the big question of our time. The global common good are what will determine our future as individuals and as societies. And I think the willingness and capacity of people to contribute to those is going to be absolutely central.
13-year-olds, 14, 16-year-olds, 20-year-olds. They did some amazing things in the world, and we see some exceptional people doing that today. Do you think that we're kind of like underestimating what young people can actually do, especially from the point of view of educators and so on and so forth? So, how can that shift? What kind of shift needs to happen that we can actually believe that our young people who will live into the 21st century, they'll live into the rest of the century, that they can actually shape this century to be a flourishing, peaceful century?
Well, I think, many young people are taking an enormous amount of responsibility for, the climate, for the global common good. And I do believe if we just did a little bit better in our education systems to nourish that agency, that, self-efficacy, that belief actually that what you do will have an impact on other people, I think we would see and find a different world. In fact, again, children are born with an abundance of agency, with an abundance of creativity. They're going to question everything that you do. They're to experiment with everything that comes into their way. They are willing actually to live and work with children who are very different from them. And then in school, often we focus very much on compliance. We make children consumers of, prefabricated wisdom. We teach them the established wisdom of our times rather than how to question the established wisdom of our times and how to, build that agency, take action. But, despite all of that, you find a very large number of young people who are, getting out of that box and actually designing and developing their own education and who take greater ownership over what they learn and how they learn and when they learn and where they learn. And I think, that's the future of education. Once again, agency really is at the heart of 21st century learning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's go to the other side of moral and innovative leadership. Why and how can students develop the innovative side of leadership, cultivating the creativity to solve complex problems of our time and advance the human condition?
Well, I think leadership and fostering creativity are almost two sides of the same coin. 21st century leadership is not about making people like you or having people, follow you. 21st century leadership is really about, providing an enabling environment where people can, find their new ideas and develop them, to take the courage and take the risk to experiment and to learn from and with failure. If you, provide that kind of leadership, you're going to see a lot of imagination and creativity. If you have a kind of very hierarchical leadership, you foster compliance. But compliance in the times in which we live is not so much of value anymore. That's, where, computers and the technology are taking over that very human capacity to be imaginative, to be creative, requires that enabling environment, and leadership is absolutely central to that.
So let's get to the how now, right? So how can schools and teachers help create an environment to develop a moral and innovative leadership mindset in their students? Andreas, you mentioned before that you want to see more bottom-up innovation going on with teachers and schools and so on. So how can we do this?
Well, for a start, listening to young people themselves, to students themselves, actually many have fairly good ideas of how they learn and how they learn best. And if we just, are more open to this rather than, educating students for our own past, then we will help them to learn for their future. The second is, rather than to make students passive consumers, create more opportunities for active learning, for learning to design and develop projects, for collaborative learning, giving students better opportunities to actually work together to figure out things, to design new ideas, to develop new ideas, taking greater responsibility. Schools are often good at keeping students inside and the rest of the world outside. I do think in the future we should create more open learning environments where actually we integrate, the world outside school better with the learning experience of young people. Again, there are so many opportunities to provide those environments. And the pandemic has shown this as well, where students had learned how to learn, where they could, own their learning processes. They had developed the right learning strategies. They had access to, interesting kind of learning environments. They could cope even with school closures. In contrast, where students used to be, spoon-fed by their teachers. They were, again, passive consumers of prefabricated learning environments. They had a very hard time in this pandemic. And I think this is what we're going to see in the future more and more, to create opportunities, environments where students take greater ownership, more responsibility for their learning, and have greater control over what they learn, how they learn, when they learn, and where they learn. And obviously technology will and can play a big role in this.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate about the OECD Education 2030 project is how the project is actually engaging students and involving them, and putting an emphasis that their perspective is important. They're on plenary sessions and so on. So I think that's a really great saying. Okay, so the next one is beyond all the things that divide us, what can we be doing to build and engage a network of moral and innovative leaders who tackle problems together, concretely demonstrating that our diverse world can also be united in a shared commitment to building ethical societies and a peaceful world?
Yeah, Tony, we are all born with bonding social capital, no? The relationship with our families, to people who think like us, work like us. What needs to be nourished, what needs to be built through education is that bridging social capital, our capacity to relate to strangers, our capacity to see the world through different lenses and perspectives, to appreciate different ways of thinking, to appreciate different ways of working. Things that we focus on in our PISA assessment of global competency. And those skills can be learned. They are perhaps the most human skills that can be learned, and where young people are more open to different views of the world, where they have a broader understanding. You can also expect them to become better at building bridges, at closing gaps in our societies, in our communities, and across society. It's like language. The moment that you start to learn a foreign language is the moment when you actually start to understand your own language. It's just the moment when you think about grammar, about linguistic features, and the same is true with cultures. The moment you engage with another way of thinking, with another culture, you will actually develop a deeper sense of your own identity. And that's why I think, openness to the outside world, bridging, gaps and identity are very, very closely related. And that's why again, the moral dimension is so key to this.
Yeah, really great. Andreas, during the pandemic, we saw parents becoming teachers, right? We saw teachers coming into the homes of families. From this experience, as we look to the future, how can the home, parents, families, the school, the community work more effectively together in providing a consistent and reinforcing message of moral and innovative leadership competencies and shared values, for that matter?
Yeah, if you look back to the last 10, 15 years, actually, we have seen a bit of the opposite. We have seen a trend towards commodifying education. Students became consumers, teachers became service providers, parents became clients, and it's actually created a very unhealthy distance between learners, educators, and families. Because learning is never a transactional experience. It's always a social, relational experience. And what the pandemic has done, it has made learning more of a whole of society enterprise. Families taking, a big part of their responsibilities in this. Learners too, learners thinking much more actively about, what do I learn today? How do I learn? And teachers evolving from just being instructors to becoming also great coaches, great mentors, great facilitators, great evaluators, great designers of innovative learning environments. And I really hope that, that is a lesson that we take with us after the pandemic to make learning a much more holistic experience for everyone concerned, and not, a passive consumption of content.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So, Andreas, here's a big rock question for you. We are 2 decades into the 21st century. We experienced during 2020 and 2021 how the world reached an inflection point. Going forward, what is the kind of foundational focus that we will need to have in order to lead to a peaceful and prosperous world in 21st century?
Yeah, the future will always surprise us. The pandemic has just given us, a first taste of what, disruption can look like. We're going to see that, with technology. We're going to see that even more with climate change. I think our capacity to find orientation in the past, things very easy. You could always look to people who are older than you to find orientation, and most of what they would tell you would be timeless wisdom. Today, things are changing very fast. You never know when you look to people, above you, whether, they have those kinds of experiences. And what matters more today is our capacity to look outward, to create orientation in ourselves rather than just finding it in our environment in the past. And that I think will become increasingly important for people. We are going to see a lot of support, from technology, from many ends on this, but will we become agents of our future? Will we become creative designers of our future? Will we be able to live with other people? I think those are the challenges of tomorrow's education systems. Again, helping us to live with ourselves, to understand ourselves, our own ideas, emotions, to live with people who are different from us, and to learn to live with the planet. And that means really striking a different balance between the present and the future.
Yeah, fantastic. So our last question here, Andreas, is kind of an open question to you. Is there any additional points, right, that you feel you'd like to share at this point that are important to this discussion here?
Yeah, I think we should look to education not just as a matter between institutions and individuals, but learning will increasingly become a life-wide process where, education institutions, of course, will be very central at the beginning of people's lives. But, the point of success is not to equip you with a degree, but with the motivation, the attitudes, the capacities to continue learning throughout life, and to find opportunities in your life, to build your future, to upgrade your knowledge, your skills, to be able to change your attitudes, and to strengthen your values throughout your life. I think that is going to be very important. In the past, once again, we used to learn to do the work. Now we could prepare people for a future that we know. Today, learning has become the work. Now we need to learn for jobs that have not been created, to use technologies that have not been invented, but most importantly, to solve social problems that we cannot yet imagine. So our capacity to learn, but equally important also to unlearn and relearn when the context changes, will be increasingly important.
Andreas, I really want to thank you for the wisdom that you shared here today, relating to the theme of the moral leadership in peace building for our changing world. You've got years and years and decades of experience, and I think this is very important content and information that you've provided. I feel this has been a great value add to this year's convention and to this year's theme. So deeply thank you so much for your time here today. Thank you.